Hello all, welcome to part 16 of the Wireless LAN Security Mega Primer. So finally, we've reached the Cafe Latte attack. And in this video, we will try and understand the basics of how to get started with many of these client-side attacks. So in a previous video, we actually saw how web can be cracked using a simple replay attack. Now, unfortunately, it is not just the way web encryption works that is all the only thing which is flawed. There are many other attacks which are applicable on web. The first being message injection attacks. Now, the primary reason is there is no replay protection. In the sense, a packet which was sent by either the client or the access point can be taken by the hacker and can be replayed, and it will be received by the destination without any issues. And a living example of that is what we did in the replay attack using ARP replay packets. The next one is actually message injection. Now this is very interesting. What unbelievably can be done is that even if you do not know the web key and you still haven't cracked the web key, but still because of various flaws in web, it is possible to inject arbitrary packets into the network, and these packets will actually be valid encrypted packets which will be accepted by any of the devices in the network. So this may sound very unbelievable, right? And in this presentation, we will explore the basics of how this works, and this will chalk out the way to understand rest of the injection attacks. So the whole basis of these injection attacks lies in the fact that web has a flaw which allows for message modification and injection. Now, what is meant by message modification and all of that? Now, to draw your attention, there was a paper written very early on called Intercepting Mobile Communications, the Insecurity of 802.11. And this talks about a lot of attacks, which web is vulnerable to. Now, the one which we are really interested in is basically here called message modification. Now, there's a bit of math here, and we'll kind of come back to these slides to understand some aspects of that math. So what is basically happening is, if you remember, we had said that the web checksum, which is going to be there inside the web packet, the ICV, is actually a CRC32 checksum, right? Now the problem really is that the CRC32 is a linear function of the message, and hence the checksum is distributive over the XOR operation. Now you may find this to be very confusing, but just hold on for a minute. So basically what the paper concludes with all of the mathematics is that even if you have an encrypted packet, an attacker can actually create a bit mask and a checksum for that bit mask using the CRC32 algorithm, and can very simply just do a XOR of the encrypted packet and this bit mask along with the ICV or the CRC32 checksum of the bit mask. And once the checksum is done, post all the calculations, what you will actually see that this is equivalent to the same original key stream XORed with the modified message and the modified checksum. Now, what does all of this mean? I mean, some of you who may be familiar with XOR operations, how they work, and probably are a little bit into math may have figured it out. It's not very difficult actually. But let's try and understand this from a packet perspective. What does this actually mean? So let's basically go ahead and look at this image. If you remember this from the last presentation, basically you have the IV, which is 4 bytes, and then you have the actual encrypted data consisting of the data for the application along with the ICV, which is a 4-byte CRC32 checksum, right? So we can represent this as encrypted data and encrypted ICV. Both of these are encrypted. Now, basically, if you remember the basics of web, this can again be broken up into the actual data, of course, unencrypted and in plain text, and the ICV for this data, which is the CRC32 checksum. And this is actually XORed with the RC4 key stream, which is produced by the web algorithm, right? Now, basically, the encrypted data is nothing but a XOR between data ICV and the RC4 key stream. So now let's understand this a bit further. So what is the attacker actually going to do? Now basically what the attacker wants to do is to be able to modify this packet without knowing the plain text. Now you may ask, well, what is the point of really modifying something within a packet when you really don't know what's inside the packet, right? And that's a very good question, but I'll just tell you to hold on to that question for a minute, right? Right now, the only thing we are going to talk about is there is an encrypted packet. I am the attacker. I have no idea about what the key is. I have no idea currently what is there inside the packet. However, can I just arbitrarily change some bits and bytes here and there, but still ensure that the packet is a valid web encrypted packet? And this is exactly what we are going to do right now. So we have the encrypted packet, and basically what we want is to modify this packet somehow. Now if you think about it, a simple way to modify is actually to create a bit mask. What is a bit mask? Well, very simply, this could be a series of zeros and ones, which when XORed with the encrypted data will give an output, which is what you want in the final packet, right? But currently we are unaware of what is there inside the encrypted data, and hence we can only speculate. So attacker modifications is just a bit mask which I have created, and when I go ahead and take this bit mask, what I'm going to do next is actually run the CRC32 algorithm, which is exactly what is used to calculate the ICV on this bit mask. And what I get as output is basically an ICV value, which we will see in the next slide will act as a patch for the original ICV. So let's take a step back, and this is what we've done. We've taken a bit mask and we've calculated the CRC32 checksum for that bit mask, right? And what we now want to do is basically just XOR the encrypted packet with our bit mask and the ICV we calculated for that bit mask. And what this will give us is actually a modified encrypted packet along with an encrypted ICV. Now here is the funny thing, unbelievably this is actually a valid encrypted packet, and this is the flaw which is being pointed out in that paper. The paper basically says, you know what, here is the interesting thing. I can create an arbitrary bit mask. I can then go ahead and calculate an ICV for that bit mask. And then I can just concatenate the bit mask, the ICV, and then just XOR it with the original encrypted packet. And what I'm going to get is actually another encrypted packet. But this packet is also a valid web packet. What this actually means is that we have tampered the data, but we have ensured that the ICV value is correct for this new data inside it. So to break it up, basically, if you kind of want to visualize this, what is really happening behind the scenes is our original encrypted packet actually was the plain text data along with the ICV for the plain text, and this was XORed with the RC4 key stream, right? Now, what we are doing is we are now XORing this encrypted packet with the attacker modification and the ICV patch. Now, here is a very interesting property of the XOR operation. Let's say the original plain text packet is A, the key stream is B, and the attacker modification is C. So currently the way we are looking at it is A XOR B, which is we XOR the plain text data with the key stream to get the encrypted packet. And then if you remember the previous slide, we are going ahead and XORing that encrypted data with the attacker modification, which is C in our case. But interestingly, A XOR B XOR C is also equal to A XOR Z XOR B. What this actually means is we can rearrange all of these and the output will still remain the same. So basically, instead of visualizing this as plain text data encrypted with the RC4 keys, XORed with the RC4 key stream, which in turn is XORed with our attacker modification and the ICV patch, we can visualize this as the original plain text data and ICV getting XORed with actually the bit mask we have created to modify that data, along with a patch which will ensure that the new ICV which comes out is exactly correct for this modification which happened by doing a XOR between the plain text data and the attacker modifications, right? So now this is valid, and hence when you XOR it with an RC4 key stream, which is of course valid for that web key, the output is a valid web encrypted packet, right? And if you kind of look at it, this is how you would visualize the entire thing. Basically, we take the original packet, we can kind of visualize and break up the problem. Imagine that now the attacker modifications are getting XORed with the plain text. The attacker has crafted an ICV to ensure that when this is XORed with this ICV, then a corrected ICV comes in, which is the ICV value for this modified data. Now when you XOR this with the RC4 key stream, which is also a valid key stream, then what we get is basically a modified encrypted data along with an encrypted ICV which corresponds to this data, and hence we have a valid encrypted packet, right? So I hope this part is clear. A little bit of math here and there, and that is exactly what the first slide talks about, that we have the encrypted packet and we create a bit mask and we calculate a CRC32 checksum for that bit mask, and then we concatenate both of these and XOR it with the original ciphertext, which is the original encrypted packet. Now the original encrypted packet is nothing but the RC4 key stream being XORed with the original message and the original ICV. And when you XOR it with the bit mask and the checksum of the bit mask, basically due to various properties of the XOR operation, what we finally end up having is this is nothing but the key stream XORed with the modified message, which is nothing but the original message M XORed with the bit mask, and the checksum is nothing but the checksum of the original message XORed with the checksum of the bit mask. And hence the output is the original key stream XORed with the modified message and the modified checksum. And because this modified checksum is absolutely valid for this modified message, when decryption happens, the access point or the client receiving this packet gladly accepts the packet, right? So hope all of you have understood this part. It took me some time to figure out how to draw all these diagrams and explain this in a non-mathematical way. I'm not sure if I've succeeded in it. Please leave your comments behind about it. And if it's still confusing, I'll try and figure out how to explain this better. But leave your comments and feedback behind. It's important. Okay, so what are the repercussions? I just made some very good ginger tea to kind of sip it a little bit while making the video. So, feels good. So, what are the repercussions? The repercussion is we can take any arbitrary encrypted packet and flip bits there by using a bit mask, and then by calculating the ICV for that bit mask and XORing it with the original packet's ICV, we are very easily able to form a new encrypted packet which is valid. Now your question might be, well, how do we know where the encrypted packet's ICV is? Well, very simple. It's the last 4 bytes which is part of the data. Now the cafe latte attack and a lot of other things actually use this property to play around with various packets and break web encryption, right? We will understand that in a bit. So now we are formally going to start the cafe latte attack. And this is the picture which I had kind of used in the original presentation, a cup of cafe latte served with the web key. And if you see, there is actually a web key inside the cup of cafe latte. And by the way, the next couple of images and slides are all copyright of Airtight Networks. That's where I used to work when I did all of this interesting research. So due acknowledgements to them. So now let me try and make you understand about exactly what is the cafe latte attack. Now, before cafe latte was discovered, all the web attacks, whether it was the FMS, Corec, PTW attack or any of the other attacks, were all limited to the exposure area till where the RF signal would go. What do I mean by that? Well, you have an access point and you have various clients, right? And the graph here is distance from the authorized network and various web attacks which are applicable. Now, most web attacks were all primarily concerned with being within the range of the RF network of the access point. What do we mean by that? Well, there is an AP, clients are connected, and an attacker would always have to be somewhere around the vicinity so that he can either affect the access point or the client, right? So nobody had really fathomed that actually you could go ahead and try and crack a web key or do something malicious far away from the authorized network, right? And I think this was one of the first client-side attacks, apart from, of course, the whole hotspot attack, which targeted, clients which were roaming. So the question really is it possible to crack the web key of a client which is roaming, which is far away from the authorized network, right? Now, how do we go about this problem? So we start by making some very interesting observations. Now, the first question is, can we somehow have an isolated client generate web encrypted data packets using the authorized network's key? So the first thing which helps us here is the following. Now, if you can recall, almost all operating systems actually store the various credentials, passphrases, keys, etc. of networks you have previously connected to, right? And this is called the preferred network list if you're on Windows. On other operating systems, this would have other flavors. So Windows caches the web key of various networks in its PNL. And as we know from web cracking, what we really require is a large number of data packets which are encrypted with the web key, right? This is how Aircrack NG used to do the replay attack, get a lot of web encrypted packets with different IVs, and then run the whole weak IV checks using the FMS attack, Corec attacks and whatnot, and was able to crack the key. So what we really need is somehow to make the client generate data packets with the web key. Now, well, if you're near to the authorized network, this is pretty trivial, right? You could just use Air Replay and probably have the client or the AP or both generate packets. But how can you make a client which is thousands of miles away from the authorized network suddenly generate these thousands of packets encrypted with a web key, which anyway belongs to an authorized network so far away? So this is where the second observation comes in. Now, if you remember when we talked about the hotspot attacks, a lot of people asked questions. Well, you created an open access point and an open AP was configured on the clients, and hence the client was able to connect back to you, right? This typically is true when we talk about hotspots, T-Mobile, Google Wi-Fi and whatnot, where open authentication and no encryption is there. But would it be possible to have a client connect to you when the PNL consists of, let's say, a web encrypted or a WPA encrypted access point, right? So the answer to that question is actually a yes. We'll look at it from a web's perspective in this video. So what happens? Well, imagine this to be a roaming client and imagine this to be an attacker sitting in the parking lot. Now, a roaming client, as we know, will send out probe requests for various networks configured in its PNL. Let's assume for the sake of simplicity that default is that network and default is a web encrypted network. So when the client sends these probe requests, the attacker will respond back with a probe response. This is exactly similar to what we did in the hotspot case. Then client sends an authentication request. Now here is the funny thing, regardless of whether the authentication is shared key or any other form which is OpenAuth, well, the attacker can always reply back by saying authentication succeeded. Why? Because there is no mutual authentication, right? There is a huge problem here. It is the client who is authenticating itself to the access point or the attacker. So here's the funny thing. I just want the client to connect to me. So the client says, well, is there a default here? And I say, I'm default. And the client says, you know what? I need to prove my identity to you. So here is the auth request, maybe shared key. And I just send some arbitrary challenge. The client will encrypt that with the correct web key, send it back to me. And I just say, you know what? Yes, you're absolutely right. The encryption works fine in the sense you've encrypted it with the right key because I was able to decrypt it and match it with my encrypted version. And hence, go ahead, connect to me. And this is exactly how the attacker sends the auth success, and then after that, the association phase completes. Post that, basically the client will send data. Now, you may ask a simple question. The attacker does not know the web key. So how can he accept these data packets, and why would the client keep on generating thousands of data packets? When what is actually going to happen is, because the attacker cannot decrypt the packets at this point, he will just have to silently ignore them, and then the client will just stop transmitting at some point, right? So we'll try and understand all of these in the next video. In this video, what we will do is this entire phase, which is we'll set up a web encrypted access point, and we'll see that a roaming client can connect to us and authenticate to us even though we do not know the web key of that network for which the client is actually probing, right? So let's go to our demo. Here we are. And let me quickly go to full screen. So the card is already configured. I guess it's up and running. What I'm actually going to do is run this on channel 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and monitor the client. So if you notice, I already see a client which is going ahead and probing for various networks, one of which is actually PwnMe, other is Wireless Lab, the third is Vivek. So PwnMe is actually a web encrypted network. Now you may ask me, how do you know that? So we will cover that in a separate video because there's a lot of theory behind it as how to even try and figure out whenever a client is probing for a particular network, what encryption it has, right? So we'll take that in another video. For the time being, just assume that PwnMe is a web encrypted network. Now, till now, we were very easily able to have the client connect to us when we were, when the client had an no encryption network basically configured like Vivek or Wireless Lab, but now PwnMe has web. So what do? Well, we use and create a new access point using Airbase NG, and one of the things which we actually do here is basically tell it to actually set the web flag. So we have -w1 and then the ESSID, which was PwnMe, and then channel is 1 once again, and then we have the Mon0 interface, right? So now the access point is up and running. Before I start my client once again, let me open up Wireshark and let me start sniffing on the Mon0 interface. So we already see a lot of beacon frames for PON.me. Now what we can do is let's apply a filter for the BSSID, and we really are not interested in beacon frames, right? Now let me go ahead and start the client once again. And if you notice, the moment I started the client, it auto connected to PON.me, right, as you can clearly see. And the interesting thing is that the client used shared key authentication, right? So what really happened? Let's kind of go back here. Oops, I think I forgot to start the packet sniffing. Anyway, so let me just switch off the client once again so that we can quickly simulate. The alternate path, of course, is to send a deauth, but I guess this will be a bit more faster. And let me go ahead and enable it. So now the client is searching for the network and it has automatically connected to PON.me. Now let's look at the various packets which have been collected. So let me stop this. Let me go up here and try and understand what really happened. Right, so you see the probe request, probe response phase. Right now, because of the filter, you're only seeing the probe response. Probe request was a broadcast packet which didn't have anything to do with this BSSID, and hence the filter is removing it. Then we have the actual authentication phase, which is very interesting, where if you look at it, this is the client which is actually sending shared key authentication packet. So this gives a very good idea that actually the network configured on the client is using WEP with shared key authentication, right? Because the client is actually saying, you know what, my preferred algorithm is shared key, and it can only do that when it has experienced that before. So this is actually the first packet which is sent by the client, and to which, of course, you know, we go ahead and send the second packet. Client sends the third packet, and after that we actually have the whole sequence where the encryption and everything happens perfectly, right? So the interesting thing here is that the client send a request for auth. Our fake AP, just a fake web AP for the authorized network, just sent an arbitrary challenge text. The client stupidly encrypted that with the real web key, and to which our alpha card happily said, you know what, you're authenticated. Great. And from that point on, basically data started. Now you're wondering, how come we are able to see this data? If you remember, we had actually set a web key in one of the previous videos in preferences, right? And that is the web key of the authorized network PON.me, which we had created, I think, in the previous video. And I guess I've still left the decrypt on along with the key itself, right? And hence we were able to see it. Or else the only thing currently the attacker can see, simply because he doesn't know the web key, is this encrypted data. That's it. There is nothing else he can see right now. And if you notice, well, after some time the client just basically stops sending out data, or the data rate is so slow it may take to a couple of days before actually the attacker may have sufficient number of packets to crack the web key, right? So basically what have we learned in this video? That even if one of the networks on the client's preferred network list is a web encrypted network, it is still possible to set up a honeypot access point and lure the client to connect to you, even though you are unaware of the web key. And this is simply possible because there is no mutual authentication. Only the client is authenticating to the access point, within which case We are the first access point and we happily accept any credentials shown by the client, right? Now, in the next video, we will actually look at what is the fundamental basis for using this along with the Cafe Latte attack to crack the web key. So that's all for this video. Looking forward to read your comments. Thanks a lot for all the emails and comments. I try my very best to reply to each one of them promptly. If there is a slight delay, please do not mind. I will reply to each and every one of your emails as well as to your comments. So thank you and look forward to seeing you in the next video.